They called it the narrow gate to freedom, a mountain pass so tight that only a few hundred men could stand between a god-king's army and the fall of Greece. Yet, within those rocky walls of Thermopylae, as King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans prepared to die with honor, there was one man whose name would echo through eternity for all the wrong reasons. A name once forgotten in whispers, later cursed in every corner of Greece. A man not remembered for courage, but for betrayal. But who was he really? A villain by choice, or a desperate outcast in a world that left him no place to stand? The story begins not with kings or battles, but with a malformed boy born beneath the mountains of Trachis. His father, once a warrior, raised him on stories of Sparta's glory, the shining city where boys became soldiers, and soldiers became gods among men. Ephialtes grew up dreaming of standing in that phalanx, shoulder to shoulder with the men of Leonidas, fighting for Greece. But his body betrayed him. His spine curved. His strength was uneven. He couldn't hold the great bronze shield or lift the spear high enough to strike in formation. When he reached Sparta and begged for a place among the warriors, Leonidas himself looked him in the eye and said words that cut deeper than any sword. "We admire your courage. But a man who cannot hold the line endangers it." It wasn't cruelty, it was law. Every Spartan soldier had to fit the phalanx, had to hold his shield tight enough that not a breath could pass between men. A single weakness, and the wall of Sparta would break. Ephialtes was dismissed, politely, even respectfully, but to him, it felt like exile. He left the camp in silence, carrying not just his spear but a wound that would never heal. Days later, the mountain pass trembled beneath the march of Xerxes' army, the Persian king who claimed the world as his throne. His banners darkened the horizon. His soldiers drank rivers dry. The Greeks stood against a tide that seemed eternal. For 2 days, Leonidas and his men held them off. They fought like lions. They died like gods. But the Persians could not break them, not from the front. They needed another way. And that's when fate brought Ephialtes to them. The night he approached the Persian camp was moonless. No one noticed the solitary figure walking among a sea of tents and torches. When the guard stopped him, he raised his trembling hands and said the words that would change history. "I can show you a way around the mountains." He was brought before Xerxes himself. The great king reclined upon his golden throne, surrounded by perfumed air and jeweled soldiers. When Ephialtes entered, the Persian king's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in amusement. Here was a broken man, bent and trembling, daring to offer him victory. Ephialtes knelt and pointed toward the mountains. "There's a hidden path," he said, "used by shepherds. It leads behind the Spartan line. Follow it, and by morning, Leonidas will be trapped." Xerxes studied him in silence. Then, in a voice that seemed both kind and cruel, he asked, "And what do you want in return?" Ephialtes hesitated, then whispered, "Honor. A place. The respect Sparta denied me." The great king smiled. "Then you shall have what Sparta would not give you." A purse of gold was laid before him. He took it with shaking hands. And so the deal was struck, between an emperor who thought himself divine and a man who had lost faith in human mercy. That night, Ephialtes led the Persian immortals through the secret goat path above Thermopylae. The trail twisted through black pines and jagged cliffs, lit only by the flicker of their torches. The air was cold, silent, and heavy with betrayal. At the top, the Persians found the Phocian guards, the few men assigned to protect the rear path. But when the invaders approached, fear gripped the defenders. They fled into the woods, leaving the mountain unguarded. By dawn, the immortals had encircled the Spartans. In the camp below, a Spartan scout ran breathless to Leonidas. "They've found a way behind us," he gasped. "The Persians are coming." The king's eyes narrowed. He said nothing at first. Then, slowly, he looked toward the mountain trail, the same path Ephialtes had once mentioned when he pleaded to fight beside them. Leonidas understood at once. He did not curse the man. He did not speak of betrayal. He simply ordered the allied Greeks to withdraw. The 300 Spartans, along with 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans, would remain to cover their retreat. They would hold the line until the end. As the sun rose, the Persians descended from the heights, their ranks gleaming like a wave of fire. Leonidas and his men stood waiting, shields locked, spears ready. They knew death had found them, but not one man flinched. In the distance, Ephialtes watched, the gold heavy in his hands, the smoke of battle rising like a curse. And for the first time, he realized what he had done. When the fighting ended, Leonidas lay dead, pierced by countless arrows. The Persians severed his head and mounted it on a spear. The past was lost, but his story, became legend. And Ephialtes? He fled, not back to Persia, not home to Trachis. He wandered through Greece as a hunted man. The reward he'd hoped for turned to ash. Wherever he went, people spat at his feet, shouting one word: traitor. His name became a curse. His image, a lesson whispered to children, the man who betrayed the brave. But history has a cruel way of simplifying men. Was Ephialtes truly evil, or just broken by a world that worshipped perfection and crushed those who failed to fit its mold? The truth, like the pass of Thermopylae, was narrow. And in that narrowness, one man's despair became another's legend. When the battle at Thermopylae ended, and the last Spartan fell beneath the Persian blades, the mountains fell silent. But in that silence, a new sound began to spread, the name of the man who betrayed them. The Greeks did not speak it as a name anymore. It was an accusation, a wound. Poets cursed him. Mothers used it to frighten their sons into obedience. And as news reached Athens, a wave of fury swept across the land. Every village, every polis, whispered of the man who sold Greece for gold. Meanwhile, Ephialtes wandered the shadows of his homeland, avoiding roads and faces. He hid in the forests near Mount Ida, where even shepherds avoided his path. The gold he'd received from Xerxes was gone, spent on food, on bribes, on the illusion that he could still belong somewhere. But no one wanted him. One night, as he sat beside a dying fire, a merchant recognized his face from a Persian camp rumor. "Traitor," the man hissed. "You led the god-king's army to our brothers." Ephialtes didn't reply. He only looked at the man with eyes hollowed by guilt and fear. When the merchant raised a knife, Ephialtes fled into the dark, his own heartbeat echoing like a drum of war. From that night on, he never slept in one place twice. Back in Sparta, the loss at Thermopylae was mourned, but not regretted. To the Spartans, Leonidas had achieved immortality. His stand became the very definition of duty and honor. His death was not failure, but fulfillment. Yet even as they sang songs of his bravery, they swore vengeance on the one who had undone it. The Ephors, Sparta's ruling elders, declared a blood price upon Ephialtes. His name was carved into stone as an enemy of Greece, his home confiscated, his kin shamed. And from that moment, any man could kill him, without consequence. The Persians, for their part, cared little for their former guide. Xerxes had already moved south, his armies pushing toward Athens, burning everything in their path. To the great king, Ephialtes was just another tool, useful for a moment, then forgotten. But among the Greeks, the story of Thermopylae became more than a tale of battle. It became a myth of contrasts. Leonidas the noble king, and Ephialtes the cowardly traitor. One immortalized by sacrifice, the other by shame. Yet not all believed it so simple. Years later, in the city of Delphi, a priest of Apollo spoke quietly to a group of travelers. "The gods," he said, "often test men not by glory, but by weakness." Ephialtes was weak, yes, but it was Sparta that broke him first. Remember that. Those words spread in secret circles. Philosophers began to question the tale. Could it be that in their worship of perfection, the Spartans had created the very monster that destroyed them? But such ideas were dangerous. Sparta had no patience for pity. To them, the world was divided. Heroes or cowards, glory or disgrace, Leonidas or Ephialtes. Nothing in between. Meanwhile, Ephialtes' flight took him to Thessaly, far north of his home. There, he lived under false names, working as a porter, sleeping under broken roofs, always looking over his shoulder. He told no one who he was. Yet, even when safe, he could not escape the sound of his name whispered in marketplaces, painted in red on walls, the betrayer of the pass. Sometimes, in dreams, he saw Leonidas' eyes, not angry, not vengeful, but sorrowful. The king's final words, remembered by those who survived, haunted him. May history judge not our deaths, but why we chose to stand. Ephialtes would wake in cold sweat, realizing that while Leonidas had gained eternal peace, he had gained eternal torment. In one winter's dusk, Ephialtes returned to Trachis, his birthplace. The people there recognized him immediately. He didn't resist when they dragged him before the town elders. They shouted, spat, and called for blood. But an old man, his father's friend, stepped forward. Let him speak, he said. Let the traitor tell us why. Ephialtes looked at the faces before him. I wanted to be one of them, he said quietly. I wanted to stand in the line, but they said I was not fit, that my weakness would break them. They were right. It did, just not the way they thought. No one spoke. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The old man turned away in disgust. Take him out, he muttered. Let the gods decide his punishment. That night, Ephialtes fled again into the snowbound mountains. It was said he wandered until his feet bled, until hunger clawed his insides, until he could go no further. In the years that followed, Greece rose again. The Battle of Salamis, then Plataea, turned the tide. The Persians were finally driven back. The legend of Leonidas grew brighter with each victory. His sacrifice the spark that lit the Greek resistance. And Ephialtes? He faded into rumor. Some said he was hunted down and killed for the bounty. Others whispered he threw himself from a cliff, unable to bear the weight of his name. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: no grave marked his resting place. But centuries later, when Herodotus wrote his histories, he did not forget him. He recorded, simply, Ephialtes, son of Eurydemos, of Trachis, led the Persians by the mountain path which was the ruin of the Greeks. And thus, with that one sentence, his fate was sealed forever in ink. No glory, no redemption. Just a name, etched beside the word betrayal. Yet even now, beneath the dust of time, a question lingers. If Sparta had embraced the broken, if their walls of pride had opened just once for compassion, would Thermopylae still have fallen? Would Ephialtes have become the man history cursed? The line between hero and traitor was thinner than the pass itself. Years passed, but the shadow of Ephialtes refused to vanish from Greece. His name became a wound in the nation's pride, a name parents cursed, poets mocked, and kings used as a warning. Yet beneath that legend of treachery, buried under centuries of rage, something darker waited to be uncovered. Because not all believed the story the way history told it. In the quiet scroll chambers of Athens, a historian named Lysander of Thespii began collecting accounts from travelers, soldiers, and merchants who had once known Ephialtes. What he found was not the portrait of a greedy man, but of one broken by his own people. According to these forgotten testimonies, Ephialtes had once trained under the Spartan system, eager to earn his place among the phalanx. But he was small, weak, and clumsy. The instructors mocked him. The boys beat him. And when he failed the agoge, he was cast out, not as a student, but as a disgrace. Years later, when Leonidas marched north to meet the Persians, Ephialtes offered his service as a guide, desperate to prove his worth once more. But Sparta refused him again. He cannot stand among us, one captain said. He's already fallen once. That rejection was the final wound. And that night, Ephialtes crossed the mountains, not out of greed, but out of despair. Still, despair doesn't excuse betrayal. The act at Thermopylae cost thousands of Greek lives. Yet as Lysander wrote in his secret notes, when we glorify heroes, we often need villains to make them shine. Leonidas' stand would never have become eternal without the fall that followed. Without the betrayal, there could be no martyrdom. Without Ephialtes, there could be no legend of Sparta's last stand. It was almost as if fate itself had chosen him, not as a villain, but as a sacrifice of another kind. Centuries later, The Roman historian Plutarch would write of a strange pilgrimage. Travelers to Thermopylae would stop at a ruined stone altar near the old mountain pass. It was said to mark the spot where Ephialtes had hidden during the night of the betrayal. People would spit on the ground, curse his name, and then, oddly, leave an olive branch. Why? Because in some versions of the old songs, Ephialtes was not the betrayer, but a cursed man, one whom the gods used to teach Greece humility. In those songs, it was Apollo who whispered in Ephialtes' dreams, leading him to reveal the mountain path. Not out of malice, but because fate demanded that the arrogance of men be broken before Greece could unite. If true, it meant Thermopylae was not a tragedy born of treachery, but a divine test written by the gods themselves. Even within Sparta, whispers began to change tone. Young warriors began asking questions their fathers would never dare speak aloud. Would Leonidas' name burn in our hearts forever if he had simply returned alive? Would Greece have risen as one if he hadn't fallen? Such questions were dangerous. Yet they revealed a deeper truth, that betrayal, too, can forge unity. Ephialtes, the man who destroyed them, had also bound them together in vengeance. His sin had created a legacy far greater than his life. But where did that life truly end? A Spartan bounty hunter named Athenidas was said to have found him years later in Malis, a northern village. According to Herodotus, he killed Ephialtes for a bounty placed on his head. Yet other accounts claim differently. One tale says Ephialtes lived much longer, hidden among mountain hermits, old and broken. They say he became gaunt, half-mad, speaking only to ghosts. Sometimes villagers would find him standing atop a ridge, staring south toward the pass, muttering, "I only showed the way. The gods walked it." When he finally died, no one buried him. Wild dogs scattered his bones across the hills. And when storms passed, the wind would carry a faint sound, like a whisper of his name through the rocks. Some claimed it was vengeance. Others thought it was a warning. 200 years later, when Leonidas' monument was rebuilt near Thermopylae, stonemasons found a strange engraving beneath the base. It was faint, almost erased by time. It read, "Without betrayal, there is no glory." No one knows who carved it. But those words, hidden beneath the king's statue, carried a truth Sparta would never speak aloud. Because history, for all its pride, is not a tale of saints and monsters. It's a mirror of choices. Leonidas chose to stand. Ephialtes chose to betray. But both choices, in their own way, built the Greece that would rise to defy Persia. Perhaps that's why, even now, the name Ephialtes has survived. Not because Greece wished to remember him, but because it couldn't afford to forget him. His betrayal was the scar that reminded them of what unity cost. And so, every year, as the sun sets over Thermopylae, the mountains still glow red with the last light of day. Travelers who walk the path say they feel it, the stillness, the echo, the weight of something ancient watching. They say if you stand quietly enough, you can hear two voices carried by the wind. One whispers of courage, the other of regret. Both belong to men who changed the fate of the world, one by dying for honor, the other by losing his soul. And together, they tell a single story of how a king's glory and a traitor's shame became one eternal legend.